Thank you, everyone. So it's quite interesting, actually, just looking at that slide of James's there. It almost looked like employment tax side. We had three things on it that were employment tax related. So it is a hot topic. But I'm going to cover just two today, which is the furlough. I'm not going to say CJRS because I just get tongue-tied when I try and say that all the time. Furlough activity and a little bit on the tips update. So thank goodness furlough came in for the hospitality sector. It was a lifeline that was needed. But unfortunately, it came at the drop of a hat. It was overnight. No one had ever heard of furlough, didn't know what they were doing. And now we are seeing that although furlough was the lifeline, it's also going to be an activity area for HMRC. It was complex legislation. It was sent in overnight, and there was 400 changes in HMRC's own guidance on how to calculate furlough. There are 4 different sets of rules, which means that every time you just get into grips with doing those calculations, they then changed. And there are 35 areas of risk that we've assessed when we're looking at furlough. So it just gives you an idea of how complex it is. So we know roughly 70 billion has been paid out in furlough, and HMRC estimate that 8.7% of those claims are incorrect. So either fraudulently, which I'm sure is not the case here, or by error. And HMRC have allocated for the next 2 years 150 million to review furlough. We were thinking that maybe because of some of the cuts in the public services that it might affect the compliance angle of furlough, but we know that the 300 strong individuals within HMRC are not going anywhere for the next 2 years, particularly as they're obviously tasked with recovering 6 billion in furlough. So what they're going to do is they're looking at risk assessing who they go after. Makes them sound like that they're the big bad wolves. I'm really sorry about that, but you know, HMRC do tend to be, don't they? It's not tax, it's furlough. So what we've got is a sector here where they are particularly complex claims. There's lots of payrolls, there's lots of transient workforce, and employees are generally not on a fixed salary, which is a little bit easier to calculate. So you've got 0-hour contracts, etc. And that's where HMRC are going to start their inquiries. So they're looking at the complex, large claims. And they, from our experience, what we're seeing as large is more than 100,000 in claim per month, or per claim, not per month, sorry, depends on your claim period, which is actually not that much in the industry. So we're only talking over 1 million, and they think that's large. You know, some of our businesses, obviously, you're looking at millions rather than 1 million. Also, HMRC sent out nudge letters. I'm not sure if you have had one of those or responded to one of those, but those were letters asking individual companies to think about their furlough claim and whether they thought that the amounts that they had been claiming were correct, and could they review those furlough claims and be certain that they were correct. Now, if those nudge letters have not been responded to, they are going to be one of the highest risk categories that are used to work out who they're going to start looking to for investigation work. Next slide, please. The unfortunate business about this is that the reviews are going to be on a line-by-line basis. So imagine you've got thousands of employees and you've got thousands in a claim, and HMRC are going to review every single line. So when we normally do an HMRC inspection, they would look at sampling. They're not doing that. So they'll take a whole claim period and then they're going to do the line by line. So what I thought I'd do is just highlight some of the thinking on some of the experience that we've come across when we've been helping clients with furlough. So if you've got employees that are underpaid, so that's where you've got a furlough claim that has not been made in the full amount. So you've under-claimed your furlough, you will have also underpaid your employees. If you don't top up the employees back up to the correct amount that they should have been paid in furlough, that will make the entire claim for that individual employee invalid, which means that for each one of those, they're just going to be removed from the claim. So that's worth bearing in mind. Also, which is a little bit odd because we've never seen this before, HMRC are saying that if you haven't taken professional advice when looking at your furlough claims, that this is not taking reasonable care. The business haven't taken reasonable care. And that just seems odd, doesn't it? But what that does mean, even though it might be odd, is that they're saying that if there is any underpaid furlough, or sorry, overclaimed furlough or underpaid employees, the penalties could be up to 30% on top of the amounts that you're going to have to either pay the individuals or repay HMRC. But the good news is if you get in early and have a look at your furlough claims and take professional advice, it may be that you can voluntarily disclose to HMRC, which would mean that you hopefully would secure a 0% penalty. And the numbers we're looking at, sometimes you think 0%, 30% is not actually too different, but when we're talking millions, this is quite a substantial amount. Next slide, please. This is just a couple of war stories. So here we've got a hotel chain that had employees and furlough of 1 million per month. And the managers at each of the hotels was responsible for claiming the grant of furlough. And so there was no central system, there was no processes put in place here. What we were able to do is identify that they had overclaimed and that they were going to repay the furlough that had been overclaimed, and we were able to secure a 0 penalty. So if they hadn't done their review, they wouldn't have been able to secure that. The next one was slightly more interesting. We had a case where when you're calculating reference pay, you have to look back 12 months. You have to look at the period 1 month beforehand, etc. But they used 3 different calculations and thought they'd be prudent. Let's be really prudent here, and we'll make sure we don't overclaim. But what they actually did was underpay the employees because the claims were not high enough. And what we were able to do was, rather than invalidating those claims, we were able to agree with HMRC that the company repay top up the employees, and therefore there wasn't any penalty again. Next slide, please. So that's that on furlough. Tips, I won't take too long because it's not actually coming in, and you're probably fully aware of that. The Queen's Speech didn't mention anything about the employment bill towards tips and trunks. If it was going to come in, it was going to look at fundamentally how tips and trunks arrangements tips are set up, should I say. That there would need to be formal policies in place, and that employees would have a lot more they would have a lot more visibility over how tips were calculated and the records that employers need to keep. So although it's not in, we are talking to some clients about maybe early adopting and getting there ahead of it, because it will come in at some point, we just don't quite know when. Next slide. So I mentioned trunks there. So now, if the tips system is not coming in place, and HMRC are ramping up their compliance in the area, we believe that HMRC are going to look at your trunk schemes again. Just as a reminder, anyone with discretionary tips where a trunk master is involved, so there's no activity by the employer, those tips can be distributed to employees with no national insurance being levied. But there are some holes that you have to make sure that you don't fall down in terms of those trunk schemes. A couple of examples here where we've seen clients that have had a trunk master and then they've decided, okay, that one's not working quite how we want it, we'll move to a different trunk master. And then there's a breakdown in communications between the systems that are going on there, which has led to invalid trunk arrangements, and therefore the employer's on the hook for the national insurance. We've also seen where management, although they're saying they've not had too much involvement in how tips are allocated, have influenced heavily, let's say, how tips are allocated. So I guess all that overall, just wanted to say that trunk schemes are probably going to be reviewed. I mean, HRC are not going away, compliance is being ramped up, and perhaps this is an area you should think about as well.